Alright, let's take a look at how to create kind of a grungy ink splatter texture. And what we're going to do is use some brushes from inside of Illustrator, but pull them into Photoshop. So it's one of those things. It'd be cool. Illustrator's got some really cool brush sets in it. And you can't really use them in Photoshop. You can't take that same brush palette and use it in Photoshop, but there is kind of a workaround for it. So let's start off in Illustrator. I'm just going to create a new document, and it doesn't matter what size or what it looks like. It's just going to be there so we can see our brushes. And now let's bring the brush palette front and center here. And if you click on that little flyout menu, you'll see as you go to the bottom it says Open Brush Library. Well, inside there's one called Artistic Ink. So I'm going to click on that. And let's bring that one out into the center here and take a look at some of the brushes inside here. There's some really cool things that Photoshop doesn't have as far as brushes go. So what I wanted to do is use these brushes that I'm using in Illustrator in Photoshop. Well, the way I can do it is let's start off. Let's just take a look at them. We have Ink Bomb, we have Ink Drop, and we have Ink Spatter, Splash, Splat, and Spot. So in case you're wondering what the difference between a splat and a splot and a splash were, this is it. All right, it's a little bit weird. They got some weird names to them, but they look cool nonetheless. So what we'll do is we'll start off with Ink Bomb, and I'm going to take this and drag it over into my artboard. And you see here it appears. So I'm just going to click on it once to select it, and then copy it. Control C on the PC, Command C on the Mac, and then I'll flip over to Photoshop. I'll create a brand new document, and the document's going to be exactly the size of what I just copied from Illustrator. So it remembers, it knows what the computer has in memory. And then I'll paste it. Control V on the PC, Command V on the Mac, and choose the Pixels option. Hit OK. You see a little bounding box around it. Just hit Enter. And now I've got that brush inside of Photoshop. So now I need to really make it a brush that Photoshop can use. So I choose Select, All, and then go to the Edit menu and choose Define Brush Preset. And you see here it gives it a name. You can give it another name if you want, but just click OK. And now if I go to my Window menu and I look at my Brushes palette here, you'll see that I indeed have these brushes that I just created. Okay, there's a sampled brush 5. I did this before, so I have some in there, but there's the one that I just created now. So it appears inside of my brushes palette. So now the process is go through and do this a few more times. You see I've done it 4 times over here. So you go in Illustrator, take another brush, and just click and drag on it and select it. And here's another thing to keep in mind is inside of Photoshop, if you try to make this brush bigger, it's going to get pixelated because it's not vector artwork anymore. However, inside of Illustrator, I can make it as big as I want, and it's still going to keep those same crisp edges. So if you think you want it larger, make it bigger here, copy it, okay, and then go over into Photoshop, paste it, and do that whole brush creation process, because that way you'll be able to have a larger brush, where if you don't, if you start off small, when you try to make it larger in Photoshop, it's just going to start to look bad. Alright, so go do that process a few times and get a few brushes like I have here. And then let's start to create an image with it. I'll show you a couple of ways you can use the brushes. I'll create a new image, and we'll just do 640 by 480. Hit OK. And the first thing that I want to do here is move my brushes palette because it's too big and in the way. Now, I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to select my rectangular marquee tool, and I'm just going to draw a rectangle here, and see that grayish color. Let's go ahead and set that to my foreground, and I'm going to hit Alt Backspace on the PC, Option Delete on the Mac, and that fills with the foreground color. So now I've got a little rectangle. Now let's start to, we'll go ahead and we'll put some text on it. Grunge I'll type in. And let me change the color to white so you can see it. There we go. I'll also go into Free Transform. That's Control T, Command T on the Mac, and make it larger. So now I've got some text, and now let's start to add some of those ink splatters and splats and spots and drops to it. I'm going to create a layer below my rectangle. Select the brush tool, and now we will bring in our brushes palette, wherever it may be. There it is. So let's bring in our brushes palette and just click on the brush inside the brush picker here to select it. And the very first thing you need to do is increase the spacing, because by default it's going to get spaced very close together. So you need to make them further apart. And then I click on Shape Dynamics. And then here you can control the size, so I can get some larger ones and some smaller ones. And then I can also control the angle. See how it kind of makes them spin around a little bit more of a random effect here. And then I will just start to paint on my image. So now I got some little splatters and spots. So we'll do the same thing. Let's pick on a different brush, increase that spacing, add my shape dynamics to it. You can even add scattering, and scattering just starts to do just that. It scatters. It kind of makes them off the center line a little bit. And we'll come inside here and we'll do the same thing. We'll do a little scattering. I'll even switch my foreground color to this tan background. I'll even show you the RGB values here. And then we can get some different colors brought into the image as well. And then we'll do it a couple more times here. Go under brush tip shape, select one of the other brushes. See, this one's got a lot more to it, a lot more kind of splats and splatters and drops to it. And again, we've got our shape dynamics and our scattering on. We'll make this one a little bit darker. There we go. Now the only thing I think it's missing is this rectangle is a little bit too precise, considering that we're creating this really grungy image. So let's go ahead and create a new layer on top of the rectangle, and we'll do the same thing. We'll add that same paintbrush to it, and you'll see it'll start to deteriorate since we're putting it on top of that rectangle. Start to deteriorate some of those edges inside there. Okay, and just paint around it so it doesn't look so much like a precise rectangle. And then the last thing I'll do is add a layer on top of the text. And I'll probably come in here and just do the same thing, just a couple of quick brush swipes here, just to grunge up that type a little bit so you can kind of see through it into the background. It doesn't make it look like it's so perfect on top there. So what you've got here is a very cool way to utilize some of the brushes that you have inside of Illustrator. And as I showed you before, you just click and drag on the brush onto the artboard here and select it, and then you can copy and paste it into Photoshop. And it doesn't just work for the brushes that you see here. If you go to your brush picker, you'll see that there is about 20 different brush sets inside of Illustrator, and a lot of them have some very cool shapes and some very cool patterns to them. So if you're looking for a brush in Photoshop, you don't find it, chances are you might find something really cool inside of Illustrator.